So, welcome everyone. First of all, happy Pride Month. Today we have a special conversation with amazing people that I've met personally at different European festivals. I would like to introduce them briefly so that we can then focus on the conversation. So, first of all, Cameron Kostopoulos. I met him while I was working at Venice Immersive. He brought his project Body of Mind there. That allows you to experience gender dysphoria by inhabiting the body of another gender. And the project is going to be released today. Correct, Cameron?
Yeah.
Yeah, so go and download it. Andre Moravich. I met Andre at Venice Immersive as well. The project Darkney was exhibiting during that edition. It was a project about the understanding of the daily life of a person suffering from depression based on the personal feelings of the director. Then I met Akmirat Tuliyev, director and producer. He made the project Otherly, which is going to talk further during the conversation. It was Instagram stories of perspectives from women, non-binary, and genderqueer identifying creators. And I met Mirat during VR days. Selva Gonzalez, producer and creative, works at Nana Studio, cultural manager, LGBTQAI plus activist. And we met in New Images during a super inspiring panel. And finally, Lilian Hess, director. She was producer of the XR section of LGBTQAI plus at the festival BA5 Flair. And there's the new project Du Championnat, which is going to be released very soon and exhibited in Europe. And we met at IFFR. So thank you again for joining, everyone. We're going to talk deeper about your opinions, views, and work during this conversation. Today, XR for Europe, we're discussing important and very sensitive topics such as identity, representation, storytelling, and distribution. We believe at XR for Europe these issues deserve more attention within the industry as they are often not discussed in detail. The complexities of showcasing work to patriarchal, cisgender audiences in Europe, addressing censorship, the significance of queer teams in supporting impactful storytelling, and the importance of challenging norms. That's what we want to do. So to the audience, if you have any questions, you can type them in the chat and we will try to address them as soon as possible because we can see them here in our chat. So let's start with Cameron, but I want all the speakers to react to these questions if they want to, if they feel comfortable doing that. So I will try to get as much as possible to all the speakers. So Cameron, why did you choose to use immersive media to represent your story in Body of Mind?
Hi, everyone. So I actually come from traditional film, and the reason I ended up in immersive storytelling is because I think that with immersive technology, you have the opportunity to really see yourself through the eyes of someone else, whether that's like a day in the life of someone's life, or whether that's, in the case of Body of Mind, actually like stepping into the body of someone else. It's a very powerful breaking of the kind of limitations that otherwise you have in media. Other types of media, you can hear about a story from a third person, you can read a book, you can watch a film, but with immersive, you can actually like become that character. You can actually like see through their eyes, and so Body of Mind kind of takes that to a very deep level by literally tracking all your physical movements down to the wiggle of a finger, the blink of an eye, the smile on your face, and translating that onto the body of the gender other than you identify with, which allows you to have this very dysphoric effect in VR while connecting to the audio interviews of gender diverse people. So that's something that it was my first VR experience, and it really was born just because it's something that can't be done in any other medium. Identity topics like gender dysphoria or like sexuality or any of these complex things, especially things that do with our body, really do require more than just looking at a screen to talk about in a comprehensive way. And so that's why I'm primarily exploring immersive storytelling.
Well, Lilian, your project Du Championnat is quite similar about body and the movement of the body during the experience. Can you talk a little further about that?
Yeah, for sure. I was just taking notes of what Cameron was saying, so I remember it later, because I wasn't sure if you were going to come to me after. But yeah, absolutely. I agree 100% with what Cameron says about the aspect of embodiment. The piece Du Champiana that I'm working on is driven forward by or through body movement. The theme is how we may or may not be restricted by physical, societal, political structures in our everyday life, and how we may break out of those structures. And the movement you perform in the piece is the climbing of a staircase. So I'm using the staircase and its implicit symbolic kind of nature of upward, downward, breaking through the glass ceiling, all of these phrases and words that we use in everyday life that imply moving up or moving down, as a kind of metaphor to talk about this freeing yourself from these structures. So it's yeah, the reason why I wanted to make it a VR piece is exactly that I wanted the audience to explore this metaphor physically and to actually perform the movement, and thereby maybe reflect or yeah, even just being given a chance as you're climbing to meditate on this theme and what that might mean for you in your own life.
Nice, nice. Anyone else working with physicality in your projects?
Yeah, in my next project for Fragile Home, I will be using like some like walking. It will be walking experience in the physical room. It's a mixed reality project, so you will be touring yourself around your flat, and it will turn into the flat on Ukraine during the war. So and it also has this meaning that through this walking experience you can a bit more dive into the storytelling. So I think that it's kind of now a lot of projects are doing this, so it's good. I believe that it's powerful. And
Nice.
maybe just I have a question for Lilian, if I may, because I'm curious about that. If you said that you want to use like a stairs for your experience, so how will you do that? Because for the exhibition spaces or wherever you want to show it, it must be quite challenging while you are in headset to climb the stairs or whatever. So just curious.
Yeah, good question. It's something we worked on for quite a long while now with my team of technologists, because we're using a rotating staircase, so the ones that you would encounter in a gym, for instance. And we linked it up with the headset and with Unreal to kind of send signals so your body.
Ooh, we lost you, Lilian.
That was a fell from the staircase, I guess. But I kind of understand. So it's.
Well, I will ask something else in the meantime. Akmirat, instead, you decided to use Instagram stories to represent in the most authentic way the stories and perspective of women, non-binary, and genderqueer identifying creators. Can you talk more about the project Otherly?
Yeah. So I was a producer working at PBS, and I produced several actually interactive documentaries. One of them was Otherly. It's a co-production with PBS and the National Film Board of Canada. And the piece is a series of documentary shorts made specifically for Instagram stories. And they were all about belonging, told by creators who are non-binary, genderqueer, and women. And actually, there's another piece that I also produced when I was at PBS. I'd love to talk about that as well. It's called Atomo, and it was a co-production with Atlas V or Atlas 5. And that project is by two African creators, Sharifa Dada and Yetunde Dada and Sharifa Ali. And they talked about this East African tribal myth about in this tribe, in Kikuyu tribe, they believe that if you circled a tree 7 times and performed a ritual, you could change your gender. And this is an ancient African tribal myth. And Sharifa grew up with her grandma telling them about the story, and they wanted to tell this experience in VR to sort of perform this ritual to talk about that, to challenge the ideas that Africa is not ready for LGBTQ rights, and that actually a lot of the ideas around transphobia and homophobia are actually after effects of colonization and not necessarily authentic to Africa. But I guess I think your question was around authenticity.
Yeah.
So for both of these projects, what we really cared about is creating space for vulnerability, a safe space for the creators to be genuine to themselves, to really tell their story. And in the doc world, I think we always ask the question of why are you the person to tell the story, and why is this your story to tell? So that's something that I always kind of come with forefront for me as a producer. I always think about why is this director telling the story? Authorship and authenticity, I think, come hand in hand. So yeah. So and then another thing is we also I produced labs for them. So we brought in mentors, and it was really important to me that the mentors also were not just industry experts, but also actually were identified with the identities of the creators. And so I think, first of all, it was important that we created a vulnerable space, a safe space. And there were many meetings with the creators and directors that, involved crying and talking about really deep traumas, or just going into really, really deep spaces. And it was my job to create that space to make sure that the creators felt safe to be able to do that. And I think that's where authenticity also comes, but also in every step of the way, when we hire crew or when we have mentors for labs, I make sure that I think about, okay, who are the right people? Not just because there's a lot of really brilliant people who can help, but are they the right people to help? So I think about that as well.
Well, about that, Andre, I remember that when showcasing your project Darkening in Venice, you created a beautiful moment with the audience where you were asking to each of the members of the audience what they thought and felt about the project, why you made that choice, and do you feel like that festival and that kind of also ticketing system and everything allowed you to do that in the best way possible, to connect with the audience, also having that conversation?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I guess that it was quite challenging, because at the beginning I was like, okay, I will have a conversation after each screening session, which was with 4 people there. And in Venice, there was like 200 of these sessions. So it was kind of funny when I look back then, that I decided to do that. But it was not only me, but also some of my colleagues helped me in that. So it was nice anyway. But as it was the start of the project, so it was kind of good to realize that the talking about the subject is very, very important, and then we based on that most of the distribution strategy later on. Yeah, I think that it was very, very strong and powerful. It was also for me very important to be in touch with the audience and to see how they react and how the topic resonates in them. And yeah, so it was kind of a very vulnerable but also very refreshing process. And it was very good. It was nice that in Venice there were a lot of people from all over the world, so I could check out how they approach to that. And of course some like national stereotypes has risen up there, so for example, a lot of Asian people, for them it was very, very hard to share anything about such a topic as depression. For Italians, where there were a lot of them, so they were very, very open in it, and it was very well received. And as the project is operated by The Voice, and it's about voice activity, so the Italians were shouting very, very loudly, and it was very nice, I think. What was surprising that, for example, a lot of people from Great Britain told me that it's something what's very uncomfortable for them, that they are not used in their culture to be loud, So that was a bit surprising. But it also happened that a lot of people opened themselves and they shared their stories there, which I believe that it's the nicest therapeutic process, when you can share with the others and you feel the safe space there, which we hope that we created there. And then after Venice, we decided to do this mostly with the school collectives. So we organized like hundreds of screening for schools all over the Czech Republic. This year we finished already, so it was like a 2 years round. And we had like some of them, on some of the sessions I was there as well, so I could have a talk with the students and so on. On the others, there were our lecturers who were trained, into how to talk about these issues with them. And I see that it's a bit different than when to talk after the classic film, because when you have like some quite bigger cinema hall for 200 people, for example, and then you can have some Q&A session, so you can hide easily in it. But in these formats, you are quite exposed, which can be challenging as well, but it's intensive. So like my feedback from all the students and all the people who saw Darkening was that that was important element of the whole project, that the discussions were happening over there as well.
Yeah, about that, Salva. So, as Andre said, you are quite exposed when going and exhibiting your project to a festival, because usually, like, still, the main audience is a patriarchal cisgender audience. So, how do you feel about showcasing your work to a patriarchal cisgender audience here in Europe? Do you feel like you have to compromise your message? Because your projects usually are about to embodying non-human life forms, play and generate change. So how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I don't think we create for any kind of a specific audience. I think that even though, like all of my colleagues just said, like, it's very important to find your own voice and understand why are you telling this story, what is your place of enunciation, and how your knowledge responds to your territorial and identitary perspectives. I think we try to put a lot of that into our narrative. In our studio, we are two co-creators. One of us is a creative technician, and the other one is more of a producer. That's me. But we are both constantly collaborating in both narrative and also artistic things. And from this collaboration, we try to place a lot of our own soul into it, but we don't do it for anyone in particular. It does make it really hard to try to do something for everyone, because both physical, cultural references are very complicated. The headset is created by companies that use white cis occidental male as tryouts, so the normal height for a regular headset, as a lot of other perspectives, are regulated for this audience. And I think that is something that this industry should be changing and shaping, also because there is a lot of potential for these kind of technologies for other people, like people with mobility programs or disabilities, and this should also be regulated for these kind of bodies to make it more accessible, but also to allow us as creators the possibility of reaching further with these technologies. So I do believe in that we should be aiming for bigger, broader, more diverse kind of audience. But it's strong because how a lot of us have explained and to the normal audience of audiovisual projects, when we show our projects, even if there are docents that are accompanying the audience, we usually are there. We usually try to like wait for people when they log out of the experience, trying to see how they react. We know the narrative, so we know, oh, they are experiencing this part of the project in this moment. So we're a little curious. Are they going to get emotional? Are they going to take out the headset? We're also, because for a lot of us, we don't have that much tryout versions because we work in very creative studios, but not that much publishing companies. So for a lot of us, festivals are the first time we're actually exposing our projects for a diverse audience. So we are very curious. And that has like a bigger impact than what you think. Like having that exchange outside of the experience and people giving you feedback that you never thought was possible. People actually acknowledging things that you never took consideration of, or taking different routes also. A lot of our experiences, even though they are narrative, they have different possibilities of experimenting them. So I think that diversity, it's very beautiful. And of course, when you're exposing your piece to someone that has a very similar experience than yourself, it's more easy how they are able to read what you want them to read. But I think it's very magical when you are exposing a very specific perspective to people from a very random background, what they're able to tell you. And I think when we are creating from love, we want to reach the ears of hate, because that's exactly the perspective that we want to change. Like, I think when we create queer political projects, we're trying to create change. We are not just trying to reinforce an idea. I don't know if I explained myself.
Absolutely. Does anyone like have any opinion on this? Agree or disagree? Like Cameron, for instance, you were quite exposed with Body of Mine in Venice, and I'm sure like you may have faced like very different opinions on the project.
No, I definitely agree that like we are, privileged to have access to technology where you really can be like a bedroom artist. You really can make your own art. And that is very liberating because it means that you don't have to like pander your project or water it down for like funders or for people who you think might like it more if it was more like straight or less queer, or you don't have to do that because you really can just sit in your room and just like build an experience. I think that like Selva said beautifully, like the most important thing that we can all do is like use the voice that's authentic to ourselves, and audiences are going to interpret things differently. I mean, there's even a huge difference in how European audiences versus American audiences like digest things. What I think Europeans tend to have a more, which I love, more higher tolerance for things that are provocative, things that are really like pushing, things that really like get under your skin. I think American audiences, they like a little bit like softer edges. So there's audiences that react to different things across all sorts of demographics, and certainly like with this het straight audiences, I've certainly had interesting reactions to Body of Mine. People coming out being like, "Oh well, why don't you include the photos of the people you're interviewing?" It's like, well, that would be outing them. That's called outing. We don't do that. Things like that, where where you have to kind of say things that to a queer audience might be obvious, but maybe to a non-queer audience not so much. And obviously it is always an uphill battle because a lot of those people are the people who do run these big production companies or do have access to these funds or access to these resources and developers and all that stuff. But the beauty and I think where the needle keeps getting moved is towards the indie artists. And I think that like Silva said, it's like what we can do to honor our art is just be true to it.
About that, has any one of you had to compromise on the message or on the visualization or the representation of the message that you wanted to convey in your project, or during production or distribution? Did you have to make that choice? Andre? Yeah.
Yeah, maybe I would like to follow up on what Cameron said, because it's interesting that on the one hand, like, the medium gives you a lot of opportunities how to be open and, you know, not to be aware of some of the issues connected, for example, with queer thematic. But for example, here in Czech Republic, it's kind of can be challenging sometimes, because our project was mostly funded from the Czech Film Fund, you know, and then when I asked one of the committee's, you know, members, what's the topic which you are usually dealing with, like from all the submissions, and they said, you know, now it's Ukraine and it's like a queer topics. I'm like, that's interesting, because like in Czech Republic, really no queer stories are being told, you know, which are supported by the Czech Film Fund. So it's probably something what they kind of don't want to support in a way. So which is weird, you know, because on one hand, so there's a lot of like people who wants to tell these stories, and then there's this barrier, you know, which even for this type of industry is very present. So I believe, maybe I'm wrong, but maybe in US it can be a bit more free in this, because like the funding has there a very different structure, you know. But here it can be an issue. But it's just my what I noted, you know, while I was preparing my projects. But on the other hand, this would not be, I guess, for me, any like a block not to do the queer topic, for example, thing, you know, even though that need a darkening, or other ones where like queer topics like darkening is a bit queer because I'm queer, you know, and I mentioned it there, so it has some connection, but it was not built on that. But I believe that in some places it can be challenging. So I'm just curious if how the colleagues see that actually.
I can maybe share with Otherly projects. So this was a co-production with the National Film Board of Canada, and from both PBS and NFB, I think both sides were quite supportive to publish these first-time directors to talk about non-binary, genderqueer experiences. But we early on had a pretty big publishing partner. I'm not going to name them, but they ended up pulling out because they were saying that we were excluding men from the storytelling. And that was quite a shock to us, because you know, from the very beginning we said this is we're going to be doing an open call, and we're going to be looking for creators that are women, non-binary, and genderqueer. And they were like, why aren't you saying men? Because we should include everyone. And so we ended up breaking that relationship, because we just would not stand by that. That was not the point of this series. And I'm really proud of our executive producers who you know, stood by us when we made that decision. And and we ended up getting I believe like over 200 submissions, and they were all non-binary and genderqueer and women. And yeah, I'm glad we stood by that decision. At the end, we had 7 incredible stories, and I still think that publishing partner was in the wrong. But yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, I think we're all going to get those pushbacks, and hopefully the executives or people in charge make the right calls, or, you know, and then, you know, if you're the creator, I would say, you know, stand by your voice. And I think all of us probably have heard things that say, you know, oh, this is not for our audience, or, well, this is not for us, or we don't fund this, or whatnot. And you know, and that means that that's not the right partner for you, and there will be the right partner for you out there.
May I add to that? That's really interesting what you're describing, Akmirat, because I had a very, very similar experience with not a PR group that we were partnering with, but more in different workshops where we were given PR advice, how to market our project. And I highly value the advice that I was given. I think it came less from a place as you describe, where it was like, oh, why are you excluding men? It was more like, consider how you can market your piece in a way that more people will go see it. And it's a really tricky one because I'm currently working with a graphic designer and a PR person on kind of how exactly are we placing Du Champiana into the market? What wording do we use? And it's an inherently, or the topic I should say is one that concerns mostly minorities, women and other minorities, because we will have the most experience of what it means to go through the world and face restraints or restrictions or just having maybe less freedom of movement, whereas this may be a topic that a sort of traditional cisgender male audience will be less thinking about, concerned with. And yeah, so this decision of like, how do I word the piece and how do I present it in a way that it reaches audiences, like you said, Selva, ears of hate. I mean, it's a strong word, but it's exactly how you phrased it, and get people who we want to think about these structures to think about these structures. So it's more kind of just a work in progress moment that I'm in, and it was interesting to hear your experience and that you decided to stick fully to how you wanted to present the piece.
Yeah, and actually to add, we ended up just creating our own, because the reason we wanted to go with a publishing partner was because they had a large platform. So, it was exactly what the advice you got, you gotta reach the most audience. And then we just thought, you know what, we're gonna create our own Instagram page and we're gonna publish them ourselves, and we're gonna build the audience from scratch, and we're gonna have partners that are going to amplify those voices. So we worked with non-binary, people that helped us get the word out there. We found other partners who also amplified the Instagram page, and I think it was for the best at the end. Yeah.
And following up on that, so Lilian, your project is challenging in a way a patriarchal audience, and because it's a beautiful poetic visualization of feminism and taking Duchamp's painting as its point of departure. Your installation invites viewers to engage with the physical transgression of social constructs. So also you can go back to the question before when you were interrupted by the internet connection and explain further the installation, how is it going to be like, and also how that how do you expect the audience may react, and how do you want to challenge, and how?
So maybe I finished that sentence where I was cut off earlier, so you have a better picture of what the installation looks like. So as I was saying, the theme is, I guess, breaking out of habits that we may have formed in response to a societal political structures. And I use the staircase as a way, as a symbol, and as a type of movement that is hopefully going to make people think, reflect about how they move with their body and use their body in space. And the audience is essentially placed on or invited on a rotating staircase, which they can climb at their own pace, in their own, if they want to rest, you can rest. So your body is tracked essentially while you're in the experience. The whole experience it's very abstract. So you literally climb an infinite staircase together with a growing group of figures that surround you. And it is designed as a crescendo, as an upward crescendo. There is no spoken word. There's no, I would say, traditional narrative. And we have done a lot of user testing, of course, because we needed to ensure the safety of the staircase, and also wanted to see how do people feel in this environment, how do people respond to it, people of different ages, of different genders. And it's quite interesting. So I think, or from the experience that I've had with about 30 to 40 people in the headset, is that female identifying audiences, queer audiences, immediately get what the piece is about, while cis male audiences will have different takeaways. So sometimes there's confusion and frustration. Sometimes there is a really interesting focus just on the characters and how they empathized or felt with the group that they were walking with. Sometimes there was a feeling more of a general sort of like taking power, because of course walking up a staircase is that feeling of like climbing the ladder. And so I think the takeaways are just or can be quite different, but I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I think any takeaway from a piece like this that leads to further self-inquisition or reflection, or just thinking about it in general and maybe talking to people about it is a positive. And so yeah, it's really not designed for a particular gender, a particular audience. It's more an exercise. It's literally an exercise and empowerment, hopefully, is what I would want it to be. And I would hope that, yeah, people just reflect on that and take that away. I wanted to come back to what Selva was saying earlier also about the thoughts on accessibility. So this piece is, of course, very physically demanding. And and this is the reason also why I wanted it to be an installation, so I can build a kind of choose your own journey space. So we have a space that you can explore the piece on the stair climber, and then there's a space where you can explore the piece standing or seated as well. And there is contextualizing material around the space. So for instance, I'm working on a flat compilation piece of all the imagery that we keep seeing in film of kind of the prom queen descending the staircase, these like hyper feminized, hyper objectified images of the female body placed on this specific architectural structure. And so I think there's a lot to be taken away from just being in the space, and also having the possibility, and this is also what I loved about Andre's piece so much in Venice, of talking to other people, even though I'm not going to design a specific session afterwards, but the ability to encounter and speak to each other about the experience, I think is important. That's why I wanted it to be an installation.
Interesting. Well, Selva, you have a similar but also very different approach to Lillian, in my opinion, because you have non-human figures as well, but at the same time, you have how can I say, like you like work more towards maybe empathy in a way. I mean, Lillian as well is working towards empathy, but it's more like a social criticism, while yours is moving towards more empathy. So do you think, because also you're an activist, is it important for the audience to feel empathy for your storytelling, or is it more important to challenge your audience, or both maybe?
I think, well, first of all, I love your project, and I really hope I will be able to experience it. Sounds amazing. I can explain a little bit about what Federico is saying. We in Anai Studio, we create narrative, immersive experiences to showcase non-human perspectives that allow us to even believe or dream about hope and change. So we use different examples that are in nature as metaphors for change in our perspectives as humans relating with our environment. For example, our first experience, Haifa, allows you to become a mushroom. and you entered this experience by being a spore. And at the beginning, you have to absorb water to understand that you need something to grow, you need energy. And then when you are under the earth, you get to communicate with the roots of a tree that tells you the story of this forest that once was very beautiful, but now it's dying because of human destruction. We use a lot of this possibility that VR gives us all its embodiment to allow people to get outside of their perspective. So they don't have to even think of themselves. You get to be something new. I think some of my colleagues transform people into other kinds of people, and that it's incredibly more like bizarre for a person. You know, like Cameron makes people look at themselves in a mirror and see a different body, and that is impactful for everyone. And it's so powerful the dysmorphia that this generates, and how this can actually help a lot in explaining this feeling of dysphoria that we as trans people experience. When you get to transform them into something totally different than what it's human, I think we can play a little bit more. So yes, empathy is something very important for us. We try to generate narratives from this possibility of empathy with a subject that a lot of times feels very non-personal, but that it should be very personal, that it's environmental issues. But we also create for more intimate scenarios. We are using, for example, the echolocation that bats use to move around this world as a metaphor to see what is unseen. So we are trying to put a light on child sex abuse by using the echolocation as a possibility to see what is in the shadows. And I feel like using these metaphors that allow the user to disconnect from what they are, it can generate an empathy that they didn't know they had. And I feel like audiovisuality, but especially these technologies that allow you embodiment in such a rich way, are very powerful in that sense. And also for a lot of us, it's a very experimental thing. When we are trying to generate a perspective from a bat, it also it interests us. So okay, so how we relate with sound then? Because it's very easy to show you what you think it is, but it's exactly important to hear what it actually is, because you are playing with waves and how these waves will come back and how this reflection comes to you. It's also interesting. It has to do with perspectives. So we're playing with these perspective issues. But I think that the embodiment allows you this rich potential of empathy that it's, for us, it's very fun to play with. More than exaggerating it, it's like, okay, how can we do something strange with it? At least that's our experience.
And this makes me think that it's the question both to Cameron and Lillian, because both your projects, you have a body in front of you. For Lillian, the body is walking in front of you, and while for Cameron inside, you are that body, and you can move that body, and it creates a nice dialogue between the subject and the body in front of you, and like, what is your perception of that dialogue between the body that it's represented in front of the viewer, and what is in your mind the dialogue that it's created between that body and you?
Yeah, I'm super curious to hear what Lillian says also. I think, like, from my experience, that the first thing is there's no right or wrong way to kind of experience these works. I think that's like kind of like the beauty of creating them, is that you kind of create a set of rules, you create a world, and then people will surprise you. That's like the best part. I definitely I wanted to actually come back to what Lillian said earlier that I resonated with, wanted to add on to, which is this, like, generalizing, but some of these differences that different audiences, different demographics take away. I don't even think it's just taking away. I also see different differences generally in how people participate. Participating fully in an immersive piece is an act of surrendering to that piece. An immersive piece envelops your whole reality. To participate in that and to surrender to that is an act of like vulnerability and trust and surrender. I have personally found, again, generalizing, that non-cis straight men tend to surrender more and more easily to these works. With Body Mind in particular, their willingness to move around in the piece and really feel aligned with his body, to participate fully, to really explore, to really kind of push kind of the boundaries of the piece. I come a lot from queer people, from women, from gender diverse, from non-cis straight men generally. And so but for those people, for people who stand still too, that's not wrong. I think the relationship that you have in these immersive spaces between your mind and your body is this kind of strange, it's this strange liminal space where like your proprioception is telling you that this is not your body, because we do have like a sixth sense that tells us where our body is in space, even when we're in a headset. So we know where our hand is, we know where our body, even if we can't see it, but then we're seeing something that's not quite there. And so we're in this weird kind of back and forth. We have this kind of like what my mentor, Nani de la Peña, calls like the duality of presence. And in that weirdness is where Body Mind discusses dysphoria. That kind of weirdness of the misalignment comes back to how we sometimes feel like a stranger in our own body. But yeah, Lily, I'm super curious to hear from the other perspective too.
Yeah, so in my piece, it made complete sense to have it was important that the visitor would not have a body. In my case, I wanted to, because everyone moves through the world differently and will have different experiences. So I wanted to just create a space to be filled by the viewer, and for the main protagonist, or the figure that we join on this journey, to be another body. Part of it was also that I'm departing from a very famous piece of art called The Nude Descending the Staircase by Marcel Duchamp. And so the whole commentary that I'm trying to make about breaking out of structures is also taken from this image, because I'm bringing this body on this canvas into three-dimensional space and allowing this body to move in a different direction and change the trajectory of their existence. So it was important that we would see another body that we're joining, and that we're more in the position of an ally, or of a supporting presence in this piece. So that's how I wanted to position the viewer. You were just saying something really interesting that triggered a thought, which goes probably far beyond what people might experience in that space that I'm creating with this piece. But I read an interesting essay about how, given that the female body has been objectified and portrayed and represented to excess in the world, is that there almost is no difference between subject and object. It's like the image and the body sort of become one and are an like changeable element. And so I think that also adds an interesting layer of having this body that we've looked at a canvas still in a position that we can look at in this three-dimensional space, but now inhabiting an entirely different position and inhabiting their body in an entirely different way as well. So kind of thinking about representation and how we can change ways that bodies are represented.
I wanted to stir the pot a little bit. And Lillian, what you said about that everyone comes to the space with their own experiences, I want to use that to challenge maybe the notions that VR is an empathy machine, which I know we've all heard. And I think a lot of times we're promised or guaranteed even that VR will provide empathy, and maybe that it will guarantee compassion or solidarity. And I teach a class at NYU on VR, and we talk about empathy and VR in the class. And one of the students this past semester told me that his dad told him, you can always wear someone else's shoes, but you will always be you. And I thought that was a really strong phrase. And I brought a quote that I want to read to you guys. This is a quote by a game designer, Robert Yang, and he wrote a blog post about empathy and games and VR. And this is what he says. I'm very familiar with people annexing other people's experiences under the banner of empathy. Specifically, I've been making realistic 3D games about gay relationships for a while, and the vast majority of my players and fans happen to be straight people. This leads to a widely held but incorrect assumption that I make my games for straight people to understand what being gay is like. And some of the worst homophobes on YouTube even call my games gay simulators, so they can react with disgust toward it. This straight empathy, in quotes, suddenly makes my games more about how beautiful and benevolent the straight people are to tolerate my gay existence instead of vomiting, instead of highlighting gay culture or queer solidarity as I intended. I want to imagine fantastic worlds where straight people aren't as important, and yet they demand that I dance for them in VR whenever they want, forever. For this reason, I hate it when people think my games are like empathy machines. I don't want your empathy, I want justice. And I think that's a really strong kind of, thought about that. I don't know if the outcome of our experiences should really be empathy, because first of all, can we really quantify and measure it, and know what that empathy kind of looks like at the end? But truly, it maybe should be, because it doesn't really also do much to the community. Like, what does your straight empathy do to us? Not much. So, and I guess with that, I'm thinking perhaps it should be sympathy, the word that we should be using, perhaps, because I think in a lot of ways, sympathy is more of helping people to feel for another. And I think seeing what someone else truly goes through might be a bit more challenging. So with that, I'm really curious to hear kind of what the other panelists think.
Well, Akmer, you just threw a bomb. I think everyone.
Thank you for dropping that bomb.
Yes.
Yeah, it's something that I just want to say something very briefly, because I know I've just been talking before. I take issue with describing VR as an empathy machine as well, but it's still something I'm in a thought process with. I wonder if you just suggested sympathy instead of empathy, but maybe it's also just a challenge, or also, especially amongst us when we're creating potentially what could be considered queer spaces in VR, it's also just opening up a space or creating a space where maybe someone who isn't part of that community or doesn't understand the stories, to be in a space that is not about them, and that is not that they're not part of. Like, that is something I think a cisgender audience seldomly experiences in their lives, and to be coming into a space that they're not native to, even just that might be just an interesting challenge or stirring a thought process.
I wanted to add to this conversation about empathy, because I think there's different like the word can reach different places. And I think like when I started doing media, the word representation was in everyone's mouth. We needed representation, and because I am a racialized trans woman immigrant, like I was being tokenized as the representation tool, and my projects were expected to do the same that I didn't want to do. Also because I do believe that even though it's important to give and exchange my perspective, I don't think that it's the coin and that I want to play with in this game. Like I would rather choose to try to play with your perspective. Like I would want you to empathize on what it means to be yourself hating me, and how that should change you in the way you relate with me. Because I do not believe that humans are inheritable good. So I do not believe that just by creating representation or empathy, you will generate sympathy, for example, as Admiral said. I understand the power of media, but like before cinema, before VR there was cinema, before cinema there were books, before books there were drawings, and they have always shown sensible perspectives. And the problem is not about more sensible perspective. The problem is how we can reach the unsensible ones. How we can sensibilize people into acknowledging that to live in this world, we need peace and justice. If we don't have this, then what are we talking about? And I relate a lot with this animadversion against this word of empathy inside VR, because I think we have all been hearing and listening to panels and like go through this idea and seeing, and I understand that a lot of our colleagues are selling this to different audiences and industries, and I know that it's their job, but I do want to make the audience, especially if another colleagues, aware that if we are not being literal about the struggles and also connecting this with an actual real repercussion, then a lot of times this would just become entertainment. And I think that when we are creating art and culture, we are trying to reach outside of the world of entertainment.
Andre, Cameron, I know you have thoughts about this.
Yeah, I can start, Cameron.
Oh no, go for it. Go for it.
No, I just wanted to briefly say, like, I agree with Sala what said, and also with Akmirat. Just wanted to mention that I think that we kind of need to, yeah, we can't have everything at once. I guess that's how I feel it. Like that the first thing which you need to build is empathy, then it creates sympathy, and then hopefully justice will come. So that's just in my eyes. I see it as a process, which sometimes can be very slow, can be frustrating, of course. But I think that that's like this, and I believe that, like in terms of if VR is empathy machine or not, I think that it can be in a way seen like that, but it's that a lot of my friends who are working on in the classic film industry are saying, so that means that the classic film is not empathic or whatever, so it's I guess that it maybe has some better powers in something, the VR, some worse powers to connect, like if you compare it with the classic film. But I guess that the combination and the fact that there are still more and more projects which are trying to build this empathy and then sympathy and then maybe justice. So that's the key. So I hope it will go like that. Cameron, you can go.
Yeah, I have a bunch of thoughts around this. As I've been doing a lot of work around this specifically with gender dysphoria for the past year. There's a lot of this that I agree with, and there's some that I disagree with. I think that like I remember there was something you said about like I think it was part of the quote, but like what good does your empathy do? But actually empathy can be the difference between a parent respecting their child's pronoun and not or allowing their child to get hormones or not. Um, so empathy is a very powerful thing. Obviously, I think saying that anything is an empathy machine is a generalization. It's like, okay, well, we also watch like VR porn is a huge category, but it's not like the porn machine, right? Like it can do a lot of things, and I would never like make false promises. Um, but I think that and I do like the distinction between empathy and sympathy. I think that like what immersive allows you to do really powerfully is see your issues reflected in someone else. So with Body Mind specifically, we did a whole research study around this with a team of psychologists, where we put a group of 30 people through the experience and came out and measured both how they were relating to their body using like body image state metrics, as well as measuring their empathy and understanding towards gender dysphoria. So you actually can measure it. And so we found that people were coming out of the experience with a deeper understanding of what gender dysphoria is, but also coming back to this idea of sympathy. And what I think is more important, I agree with you, is people are answering much higher coming out. I identify with the struggles of trans people because these issues around gender and body are more universally insecurities that we all have about our bodies. We all look in the mirror and have certain things we like or dislike. We all have certain insecurities around our body. And by allowing audiences without gender dysphoria to connect, these ways that I feel about my body are the same ways that trans people are feeling about their bodies. The only difference is that this is like gendered and there's an actual like clinical diagnosis for gender dysphoria. But that idea of sympathy of being like, oh, I struggle the same way you are struggling, just in different ways, is actually very powerful. So I think that like books can generate empathy. Does that mean the printing press is an empathy machine? I mean, yeah, sure. Like, is a projector that screens a film like an empathy machine? Like, yeah, sure. Like, can VR be an empathy machine? Like, yeah, sure. What VR does differently and where more ethical kind of questions come around is that versus a documentary film where you're portraying something, with VR, you're creating a simulation of it. And with that simulation comes a lot of ethical questions of like, can you do this? Should you do this? And I would never discourage anyone from like creating a piece of impactful art for fear of like for fear of this conversation. But there are certain things that need to be respected, like consent, like privacy, authenticity. And what I argue, and I have a whole essay about this being published at the end of this year in a journal called Media Communications. What I argue is the most important thing to adhere to is emotional realism, because obviously a simulation and immersive, you're never going to capture the one-to-one of someone's life. But if you can use the power of storytelling to capture the emotional realism, that can generate a significant amount of sympathy, empathy, all the above, which for people who are struggling, like queer people in the closet, can actually make like a world of difference. And the last thing I'll say is I heard this quote this weekend. We did a showcase at Pride, and someone said, you can't always change the world, but you can change someone's world. And like for immersive, like that is huge.
I really love what Cameron was saying. I experienced myself Body on Mind, and I know how important it is, and I really praise you for the piece that you've done. But I do believe that when we are discussing this kind of subject, and you are claiming the power that storytelling can have when it comes from a personal, intimate perspective, and how this can generate empathy, I believe that the question there lies on authenticity and legitimacy. I don't know how to say the word. But you all understand what I'm saying. Like, you have to legitimately have a place of enunciation that allows you to come with this discourse, because it can dangerously go the other way around. Like, and it has happened. Like right now in the United States, there is a huge disinformation struggle on how queer and trans youth are detransitioning when they are not. There is false information coming towards the ears of people, telling them that infants and youth that are trans and that access public trans health for transitioning, that doctors and the medical boards are telling you that this is wrong and people are transitioning, and they give away statistics, and this is all lies. And media can be totally used for both sides. So I think, even though I totally agree with a lot of the things that you were saying, I can also understand how we should challenge and also question the validity of the arguments, of some of the arguments that you were using, because it can also be used against us super fast. And if we don't allow the audience to know, hey, you have to don't trust this. This is also a representation of reality. Like, if this, it's making you believe, oh, this is the life of the African people when you put on the headset and you are in Africa, that this is wrong. You know, like, this is a perspective of this person on these issues. And if you want to empathize with this perspective, it's okay. But you should create your own perspective towards certain issues. And like, we need to stop creating this idea that because of technology allowing us to give away a more real representation that has more fidelity of reality, then it's actually really real. Because none of this is like that. What we can all give away, it's our perspective and our storytelling. I even though I believe in all of your words, I also know that media can be used against us. So let's try to be aware and also let people know when someone is telling you VR or AR or XR in general have more powerful to generate more truthful stories that should make you convinced about an argument or a perspective. Don't trust that. Like, this is all tools and weapons for ideas, and ideas can be good or can be bad.
I want to just quickly give an example to what Salva was saying too. And Federico, I don't know if we're over time now, but
we are, but we can stay if you guys won't.
Well, I'll just share this very quickly. But there's a VR project that Noni de la Peña did a few years ago called One Dark Night, and it's about Trayvon Martin, who is a Black teenager who was shot by George Zimmerman. And after Noni de la Peña released that film, she had an interview on the New York Times where she said that some of the journalists told her that they understood the position of George Zimmerman better because of the film. And so those kind of moments, like Salva was saying, really empathy can be really a tricky margin. We could be playing with a double-edged sword where someone might be trying to tell a story about someone losing their life, which was unjust, and suddenly someone might be relating to a completely opposite side and saying that they felt for the person who was a murderer. So I just I do deeply admire your work, Cameron, and I agree with a lot of what you said. And yeah, so I think it's important that we just challenge some of these notions that we are. I think a lot of it is also marketing. Like, a lot of people use empathy at this point. A lot of big companies like Meta have kind of capitalized on these words. So yeah, like Salva said, I would just be careful and I would challenge these thoughts.
Okay. Well, there is one question from the public that I want to address, and then maybe we can end the panel because we're 10 minutes over time already. So is there anything about creating in immersive medias that was less effective than each of you had hoped when you started working with these mediums, the technology, the design constraint, or just audience readiness to digest messages within what are often still novel experiences? Any of you?
I would have to say that access has become a real issue for us, especially like the pandemic made it obvious that we were generating a medium that, even though it had different distribution route, it had to be rethinked. And I think now more than more that technology is changing, and that we are realizing that there is no unified version of anything, and they're competing more and more quickly, all of us. So like they're making us create something only with 2 years of life, and then probably will not be usable for a different headset, and you will need different technologies. So then, and our companies are very small, so like we cannot be updating all of our apps each year. Usually we're just creating a new one for a different headset. So that kind of disposability of like your work being so disposable by a industry, it makes it really hard, because it takes us a lot of years to produce. A lot of us are working a very low production scale. So I would have to say that for me and for our company, the main discussion about using these technologies, more than representation and like visuals or even experience-wise, that it's amazing. Like every time it's getting better and technology is getting more incredible. Now you don't need a computer, you can just use amazing headsets. It does make it super challenging to be working for an industry that it's so competitive, and like that it's making us creators always having to fight a space in this circuit.
And about that, like I remember that in your images you were mentioning how important it is to have a queer team to support your project. Can you discuss a little further on that? Because the industry is so competitive, like having inside a team that supports you, understands you fully, how much that is important, Selva.
I think, well, we try to believe that our teams also show our work, and our work should also show our teams. So it works both ways around. And I feel like a lot of times is this kind of creativity from a diverse perspective that allows you to come with like new and original ideas to fight this natural obsolescence that we are facing right now. That it's so fast. I love working with other queer people. I created my studio with my best friend, and since then, if we are opening new work possibilities, it's always thought to be for other queer individuals. It's not that it's 100% all of the time, and we also collaborate with non-queer people. But I think it's important when you are working with something so experimental, like what we're doing, to experiment. And non-hegemonic perspectives really know how to experiment better. I don't know how to say it. We have experience experimenting a lot. And I feel like there's a resourcefulness and creativeness that comes out of diversity that I encourage all of the different companies and colleagues that are hearing to try to have on their creative teams. I know it's a challenge, but I believe that right now in this world, there is so much possibilities of diversity. You can work with people from different territories, from different colors, from different races, from different sexual orientations. And there is much more languages and platforms and way of relating with work and labor that makes it more accessible. Also, like I do believe that one way of making representation count is by changing our work environments. We need more and more female, racialized, trans, non-binary representation in technologies. And there are incredible activists in this area. You were asking me about my activism before. I do believe that a lot of times what I try to do is to curate my platforms and my group of friends and the people that I'm inviting towards this diversity, because it's hard. it's hard to go to a festival like New Images and seeing that 80% of the panels are male dominated, you know, and that from those male dominated spaces, 97% is white, 100% is European also. And if you keep looking into these numbers, it makes it really scary for non-hegemonic people to be in these places. For a lot of us, like we usually are the only one in these spaces, and that means that we don't have much exchange, but also means that we don't feel like there's much property. And from my perspective, to live a good life in this world, you need to have a certain relationship with your territory that makes it your own. And even though it's related with work and we all try to escape productivity and capitalism, I feel like we also need to create an industry that is more welcoming and more diverse. And that means not only pitching queer stories, but also hiring queer people. I say it like that, looking at you on the screen, because like really, it's beautiful that we are, every time you go to a pitching session, you see like a queer story there, and what my colleagues already said. But like, what is a queer story if it's not told by queer people? Does it have the same value? Is it important for queer people at all? Or is it just getting the trend right now, you know?
Anyone wants to react on this?
Just 100% yes. Thank you for everything you just said.
All right. Well, I guess we are at the end of this panel. Thank you so much for joining this. I always wanted to do a panel like this, and I'm very glad that it was you helping me out with this conversation. Thank you so much. So this is the end of the panel. And except for Europe, we have another LinkedIn. Well, it's going to be on Zoom, but you can find the link to the Eventbrite event on LinkedIn. It is an event on how to start a national XR association in Europe, where we're going to ask 3 organizations in Europe how to start an association about XR and how to make it national, and have people to join these communities, and what innovative activities first took root, and how to strengthen the community building. And let's discover how they started building the network, finance activities, evolve services, and how it's also created collaboration between different entities all around Europe. So thank you everyone for joining. Thank you to the audience for the question, and thank you everyone. Enjoy the weekend and happy Pride Month again. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Federico.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you everyone for this panel.
Thank you.